Right, I can see numbers are still climbing, but I've got some intros to do, and we've got a lot to get through today. So I'm just gonna kick off, and people will carry on joining as they arrive. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Addressing Attendance and Engagement Adaptations in a Post-COVID World. The response to this webinar has been unprecedented, which I think shows what a critical and widespread issue attendance and engagement has become. This is not a problem we know has an easy fix, and having spoken to each of our panelists in great depth leading up to this webinar, it's become even more apparent what a complex and tangled web of factors sit behind it. But speaking of our panelists, we've got a lot of very interesting discussion for you today, so I'll introduce them only briefly, but their full bios are available on our website, of course. So introducing Dr. Francesco Del Giudice, who is the Associate Professor in Chemical Engineering and Head of the Rheological Microfluidic Lab at Swansea University Bay Campus. Dr. Celine Koning, Lecturer in the Department of Finance at Rotterdam School of Management at Erasmus University, and Dr. Donal Halsick, Assistant Dean International for the Chemie Business School and Associate Professor in Economics at the University of Limerick. Just a couple of very small housekeeping things. I would like to invite you to use the chat and the Q&A functionality as we go through, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. If it's an actual question, please could you try and put it in the Q&A just to keep that separate from the chat, as it makes it a bit easier for us to respond to those. Also, just a really small caveat that obviously AI is a huge topic at the moment, and it's something that we're all quite preoccupied with, but that's not really the focus of today. What we're talking about today is sort of taking things right back to basics, using the technologies that are tried and tested that could be used sort of right now to help solve the problems of and the challenges of engagement, retention, and ultimately, we hope, even attendance. Finally, sorry, I know you'll be sick of me, and I really want to get to our panelists, but I just want to say thank you to everyone who took the time to fill in the pre-webinar survey. We had just over 100 respondents, which I feel gives quite a good statistical sample. Nearly 80% of you agreed that students don't appear to be doing the required preparation for class. 64%, so nearly 2/3 agreed that attendance at lectures is low, especially after the first couple of weeks. 62% of you agreed that there has been a marked change in behaviour over the past few years. 68%, so just over 2/3, agreed that there is not enough top-down guidance on how or what needs to change. And finally, only 30% of you agreed that you managed to get a clear picture of how your students are doing ahead of the main module assessment. And sadly, this is not a total surprise. We hear stories like this all the time. And though it's difficult to compile a picture of just how endemic it is and whether it's better or worse in particular subjects or across different institutions, depending on their policies or teaching and learning approaches, I think it is fair to say that in general, the sector has experienced difficulties getting back to normal after COVID. So why do we think this is? Is it changing student attitudes and beliefs? Is it the university context? Is it just that COVID ushered in a new dawn of remote learning that doesn't want to budge in the same way that remote working has stayed in place for many? If I could go to you first, Francesco, to answer that one. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So I basically bring very briefly a UK perspective, because in the UK, at variance with other places, students pay tuition fees. So they have to pay for their learning, and they also have to pay for their maintenance. In general, there are maintenance grants that people and students can access. Unfortunately, though, it has been very well recognized that those are not sufficient to cover the costs. So many students are taking on more part-time jobs during lecture period, so they cannot study, and that's why we have a drop in engagement. A second point is around the toxic debate that has been in the past year and a half or so around the value of university and the degree. So some students feel that they're not getting the value for money, because that's basically one of the main cornerstone in the UK higher education. And the third one, there are some policies within universities that they generally do not tend to promote engagement. For instance, policies around mandating lecture recording across the board and similar. They basically make think that we can watch it afterwards. but we don't, and students act more or less similarly to what we would be doing in similar context.
Thank you. Yeah. And to you, Celine, can I ask the same question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I recognize it that also when I talk to students, the habits have changed so much. So they are used to now having side jobs or internships, and they have to do that because their peers are also having internships. So if they don't do it, they have a competitive disadvantage. They're used to now being able to go to yoga class at 10 in the morning, do grocery in the meanwhile, watch lectures at 2 times the speed. So their habits have changed that much during COVID. Yeah, that it's just hard, that it feels inefficient for them to go back to how it has been before. And in all honesty, like the habits have also changed for ourselves. So I work 2 days per week for the Erasmus University. I used to go Monday, Thursday to my office, regardless if I had to teach or not. And now I only go if I have to teach. And I know I feel more happy when I go, but it feels inefficient. So even I don't do that anymore. But when it comes to students, you kind of feel this responsibility to still raise them in a way, make sure they have the network and the soft skills. So that's why for them, it doesn't feel okay to not have this physical education. And what I always tell students during the first class, I say coming to class kind of feels like going to the gym. Beforehand, you feel like, I don't want to go, but afterwards, you always feel better. And students often tell me it's really true what you say. I'm always happy if I did come to class and did not watch the video from home.
I love that metaphor. I think when we spoke beforehand and you mentioned that, I thought that was just such a perfect metaphor because, not only is it that you go, you don't want to go, you go and then you feel better, but also that going and taking part in a class it sort of encourages you to do the depth of work as well that you might not if you were doing on your own. So I really like that metaphor. I think it works so well. And Donal, coming to you.
Yeah, we're similar enough in Ireland in terms of a lot more students working part-time. That definitely impacts on attendance, but we also have a big housing crisis. So if a lot of students can't find places to rent or just places are too expensive to rent. So we have a huge amount of students now commuting and then maybe choosing whether to be on campus on certain days, depending on the number of hours that they have. So they're missing out, obviously, on a lot of the student experience. They could be commuting long hours. That can have a very detrimental effect on everything, including mental health. All of that is just kind of feeding into, I think, more and more an increasing lack of engagement or seeing the need to attend lectures and thinking, I can just download the slides or I can do a little bit of work here and it'll all be fine. So that's a kind of added thing. And I know it's similar enough in other European cities where we send students on Erasmus and they can't find accommodation either. But that's, I think, another really big factor that a lot of the times they're just not living on campus or even off campus. They're commuting and maybe only coming in 1 or 2 days a week.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be like a confluence of factors, really, doesn't it? I mean, almost sort of a perfect storm. And I'm sure it's one that's mirrored across many industries. We're just in this massive time of societal change and disruption, where the past is no longer a guide to the future. And so what we're seeing, and I'm sure what you're seeing, is there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of innovation, but often in silos by individual instructors or individual teams. And of course, because HE is such a huge beast, there's a massive amount of complexity in enacting transformational change at an institutional, let alone sector level. So Panos, we've got you here because you've been doing things slightly differently, which we will come on to shortly. But what are the typical ways that you see that instructors and departments are responding to these challenges? What kind of things are you hearing from sort of other colleagues, either at your institutions or in your wider networks? And if I could go to you first this time, Celine.
Yeah, so at our institution, we really try to get back to face-to-face education. And the sad thing we are all seeing is that we are kind of forced to go back to a situation which is worse than before COVID. And what I mean with that is I used to always share my video recordings of the lectures before COVID, I would do that. And students would watch it as an extra thing to prepare for the exam. But now what we see is if we offer this hybrid option, if we offer video recordings, they won't come to class, or the attendance is going to be so low. So we are also like recommended, don't share the video recordings to make sure that there still is a solid attendance. So that's what I'm experiencing, and what also colleagues and what the institution is struggling with.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems a shame, doesn't it? That almost it's sort of counterintuitive, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if I could then go to Donal on that one. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very similar to Celine there. We've kind of moved to completely face-to-face and no hybrid option, because I can't remember, was it 21, 22, kind of just in the aftermath of COVID, we did have this kind of weird, sharing, recording type thing. And when we did that, students just stopped coming. But then when you looked at the statistics, nobody was watching the videos either, or watching very little of it. So within my school anyway, it wasn't kind of a university kind of top-down thing, but within my business school, we kind of made the call to no one can do kind of hybrid or kind of posting recordings. It just has to be face-to-face to try and essentially force them back into the classroom, because we saw a huge drop-off once we made the hybrid or recordings available.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Francesco, same question to you.
We share in the UK, talking to colleagues, the same problems, but we came out with different non-solutions. So we still provide the recording because we have to. So it's mandated by university, by policy. This is also shared by other colleagues across the UK sector, and there are reasons for that. So it's not like a whims, but it's because of disability requirement. So the law is very strict around this, and improve accessibility, we must basically provide lecture recording. The university, my university, as well as also other, I'm aware of other providers that basically do exactly the same thing. So they have the study is face-to-face, but then we post recording. There's been a huge pushback after the pandemic, because the Students' Union wanted the hyperflex model. So which basically was, some people can be in the room, some other people can be at home or anywhere else, and they could access all live in the same way. But this has been disregarded by the university because it was not seen to be effective. The skills and pedagogically, the way you have to act in a classroom are different from where you have to act online, and are different more when you have to act across the two spectra. So we have returned it face-to-face, but we keep providing lecture recording also to abide to disability requirement and student expectations in this respect. But there's a huge pushback from academics, which see, and there's been also, we read several articles on the matter, that basically, and there are evidence that they basically do not promote engagement with students generally watching at those during revision 2-3 days before the exam at 3 times their speed, because we have access to those statistics.
Thank you. There's lots of people in the chat agreeing that yes, they also have to sort of mandated and forced to provide those recordings. And I can see there are a couple of questions, I think, coming up in the chat also. Just a reminder, if possible, if it's a question that you'd like us to answer at the end or address with the panel, if you could put them in the Q&A, or just help us separate it out from the general chat. We are keeping an eye on it, and I will try and pick up any that have already been in there, but just a little point of housekeeping there. Gary, can I just come to you? Obviously, I'm sure everything that our panelists have just said sounds very familiar. Is there anything else that you're hearing elsewhere that maybe hasn't been touched on yet?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting from our perspective as well with McGraw Hill. Engagement is an issue across the board with all materials and all aspects of HE. So it impacts on us as well in a way that we're now very much involved in these conversations around engagement, attendance, retention, data capture, and different solutions and approaches that can kind of assist and support with that particular piece. So the conversation has changed kind of dramatically for us over the past 4 or 5 years, even pre-COVID. But a lot of what we hear is very similar to what the guys have already said. Trends of students re-engaging kind of 2 weeks or even a week before exams to try and get a passing grade, and in that kind of interim period, very little activity. in terms of engagement, in terms of attendance, and in terms of activity with the LMS materials that are put in place by instructors. Obviously, we tend to see kind of trends where you've got a kind of a top tier group, you've kind of got a middle group, and you've kind of got a group that disengages for the majority of any given term, particularly in undergraduate, early undergraduate modules. But the top group will generally engage with all activity. That's kind of what we hear back from the instructors and heads of departments, deans that we speak to all the time. That top group, doesn't matter what you put in front of them, doesn't matter what you put on the LMS, they're going to engage, and the stats are going to be high around that cohort of maybe 20% kind of at a maximum. And again, you've got the other end of the spectrum where you've got students that are just completely disengaged and possibly won't engage even when we come up to exam times. But the group I think everyone on this webinar is possibly talking about is that 70% in between that we're trying to capture with whatever methods that we put in place. And I guess that comes to the main point that I have is, and this comes from a lot of kind of webinars that we've done, a lot of conversations that we've had, a lot of interactions that we've had with various academics at various levels across institutions. But the glaring thing that they said is that they've all invested in some way, shape, or form in technology and digital solutions in the past, but they didn't feel like they had the right advice, the right steer, the right coaching on how to implement them, how to integrate them, how to pragmatically use technology as part of the learning process. And I think that's a really key factor, and I can see it myself across the landscape, that there is a lot of investment in digital solutions, in technology, in unique, powerful kind of AI and adaptive technologies, but because they're not really being used in any kind of creative or, as I said, pragmatic way, given all of the challenges that have been raised in the early part of this webinar, the engagement issue still stands. So again, I won't go any deeper than that for a moment, because I'm sure it's all going to come up through the remaining of the session.
But you're right, that sort of pragmatic application of the technology. I know we always talk about provision over purpose, right? It's not just putting the technology out there, but it's how it's being used. And I know that, I mean, we've got these wonderful speakers on because of the way they are using it. So I'm really looking forward to coming on to those perspectives. Just one more question before we do get there. And I pose this question with a little trepidation, because I know it can be quite a sensitive one. And it's around that tension between being directive versus permissive, holding students to higher account because they're adults who should be invested in their own learning, but versus a more nurturing approach. And where does the balance lie? And if I could go to Donal first on that one, that'd be great.
It's definitely not an easy question to answer, because well, my experience is dealing with very, very large classes. Like my first year class would be close to 700 students. Second year one is at least 550, and my smallest class would be maybe almost 200 students. So it's maybe a different experience to what some people might have and been able to get that engagement in class and nurture. But one thing we're debating a lot in my school is because, and we're not going to get into AI, but we're seeing a lot more, let's say, cheating or gaming of online tests and different types of things, where you can see like really high scores on anything that's not invigilated or proctored, and then in a final exam, literally it's like it's completely inverted. They're doing very badly, but bringing in pass fail thresholds and kind of final exam type things like that. So I've been doing it in my school, and I'm kind of one of the only module leaders in the first semester, first year, who's done it, and I see a huge difference in my failure rates because of that. And there's a lot of debate then as to whether we should be having a kind of a pass-fail type threshold in kind of an invigilated type final exam setting that's written in an exam hall, because that's the most, I suppose, protective of academic integrity when we can't see what they're doing online. But a lot of colleagues are, I wouldn't say in huge agreement as to how we do this. And I think there's been a lot of, I wouldn't say pushing students through, but a huge amount of it's because of COVID, it's because of this or whatever, and we need to kind of be, keep the students' best interest in mind. So I don't know if there's a right or a wrong answer to that one. And a lot of my colleagues, as I said, don't necessarily agree with having just much higher stake final exams where we're sure we have them in an exam setting, and that's kind of going to be the be all of the end all as to whether or not they pass that module or not. So I'm not giving a definitive answer there. we're really struggling with that question ourselves as to how much we kind of maybe push students through or just allow it to kind of happen and they'll all kind of muddle through, or how much we kind of maybe kind of batten down a bit and say, okay, we're going to make it a little bit tougher now and use a bit more of a stick in terms of getting them to engage. But there's no clear answer, and the university has not given any kind of guidance on that either.
No. Yeah, I mean, it's a hugely sort of nuanced topic, isn't it? I think this is the thing. I'm sure that the sort of, well, I was going to say the ideal answer lies somewhere between the two, but of course there probably isn't any one ideal answer either. I think it's, you know, probably whatever suits in for different courses and different settings and so on. But Celine, could I come to you next? Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so I totally agree. It's about finding the right balance, and the stick that you call, Donald, I found it in providing students with a bonus concept test. So before they attend class, they have to read the book chapter and then do a bonus concept check test. So think of multiple choice, fill in the blanks. And if they do that every week, then they get 1 full bonus point if they pass the written exam in the end. And this way, I don't force students to engage with the material, or I also teach very large cohorts, so I can also not do attendance checks. So it's not forced, it's optional, but it really encourages students. So it does give them like a way to get the basics right and to make sure they come prepared to class, they feel that they can follow it, and they engage with the test on a weekly basis, or with the material on a weekly basis. So that has worked very well for my classes.
Thank you very much. And Francesco, same to you.
Yeah, in the UK, we cannot use kind of bonus question because you have up to 100 marks and all of them has to be accessible. So you cannot go for 102 because you have a +2 kind of thing. But there is one thing that I want to stress. Okay, now we're talking about like holding students to a higher standard. I have to say something because they are all academics probably like in this call. We are biased. We decided to devote our life to teaching this subject because we love the subject. So we would really love everybody to like this subject. But if you actually go back for a moment and look around when we were students, how many people were yawning while we found the topic extremely interesting? We must appreciate that there are students that actually when we talk, no matter what we talk about, they're not as interested as we were at their time because we decided to make our job out of it. They didn't. Most of them, they do not. Okay, so this is the first thing. But one thing that I really found that is useful with students is communication. Clarity of communication. There are many ways about setting the assessment, which we will talk about later, but there is the way we set up the model, but definitely around clarification and communication. When I tell my students, that's when you can find me, that's where you have to do what you have to do to pass the module, that's where the coursework is, that's when you can look for me, that's when you cannot look for me. If you tell them, no matter how they can be happy or unhappy about the decision, they understand. So if I told them I don't want to see you at my door 3 days before the exam because I think it's too late for you to learn anything by 2-3 days before the exam, they may say at the beginning, oh yeah, but you know, this is a bit strict, is a bit like that. And then they realize, because then you talk to student rep, you talk to others, and they then start to appreciate. Of course, you always have the 10% of students that do not engage no matter what. But the idea is stick with those so improve engagement, and there are ways of doing that. And talk to student rep. If they're interactive, they can feedback about what is working, what may require improvement along the module. And in terms of assessment, setting an assessment that is passable. In the UK, we have the learning outcomes. So also to meet accreditation, etc. So in a way that students can pass the learning outcomes, even with the bare minimum, kind of a pass-fail that Donald was mentioning earlier. We did something slightly different, and then basically push the knowledge further for the other students. So in this way, we create a balance.
That's great. Thank you so much. And Donald, I'm wary of sort of trespassing perhaps into what you were going to say under the next question, but I know that we've talked a lot in the past about students not that sort of giant gap, I suppose, between secondary and tertiary education, that, you know, they come to the end of their secondary education where they've been largely kind of surveyed at close range by their teachers, by their parents. Suddenly they have a couple of weeks off, and suddenly we're expecting them to be, you know, really self-directed, mature, sort of perfect students almost. And I know you've talked a lot about how important it is for you to provide that structure. I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about that now as well.
Yeah, no, it comes back a little bit to what Francesco was saying in terms about communication. So when I get my first years, it's very often their very first lecture in university, which is obviously tough on them to have to listen to me. But they're literally in a huge university concert hall, you know, having come out of class. And it kind of just set the scene in terms of, okay, you've got 12 teaching weeks. I'm going to set out the exact structure here in terms of this is what we're doing every single week. And you've got your smaller group tutorials then that can kick in after a while, show them the online content and show them the structure in terms of each week you have a reading that you have to do online along with the lecture content. And then it's built on in the tutorials the following week where they can review the concepts that maybe students struggle with that on the online reading, plus do a problem set, etc. And then that feeds into an online test the week after that, and show them, look, if you engage with that process from day one and don't let it slip, you know, you're going to do far better. And then I show them a lot of historical data from every single previous year where I've run different regressions and different things, because I can get admin data, what points did they have in their leaving cert, kind of like their A level, you know, that type of thing. Had they studied economics or not before, can control for all of those types of things. And then how much engagement they did online, plus how many tutorials they attended, that type of stuff, to show, you know, there is actually a serious additional, a significant benefit to engaging in the process from day one, and kind of communicate that all day one, because that's when you probably have the highest attendance. They're kind of good in the first 2 weeks, and you have a more captive audience. By the mid-semester, it's when attendance starts to drop off. They don't check their emails even these days. So it's your one chance to kind of get it all communicated, and get them kind of hopefully listening to you and engaging.
Thank you very much. And Gary, did you have anything you'd like to add into that, under that question?
No, I think, yeah, I guess yeah, I don't know if you want me to speak about this now or a bit later.
Oh, okay.
Examples from
I'll save it for later then. Okay.
Yeah, I think yeah, sorry.
Perfect. All right. So yeah, moving on then into sort of the meat of what each of you guys are doing in your own professional practice to maximize student engagement and address some of these challenges that we've been discussing. Francesco, if I can go to you first. So I know you've been using teaching and learning technologies to deliver your fluid mechanics module, and have used it to flip the classroom. And I just wondered if you could talk us through the impact that that's had.
Yeah, of course. So just to set the scene, fluid mechanics is a year one module that is taught across different cohort of engineering for a total of more than 600 students, okay, for biomedical, chemical, aerospace and mechanical engineering cohorts. Now, the problem that we face is the one that we already discussed earlier, and also how you make anything meaningful for 600 students. Even if you split them in groups, you still are talking about large cohorts of students of over 100 or 200 students, okay? And how you make sure that they are actually learning and engaging with the module. Now, the way we developed the module was using the flipped class approach. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with flipped class, the idea is that the class is flipped. So rather than having the standard paradigm where the lecturer basically teach and the students study, the flipped class instead invoke students learning by themselves some material before coming to lecture, and then coming to lecture to reinforce the concept and also to apply them, okay? Of course, there are caveats there. So, because the question is, well, flipped class is great as long as they do something at home. If we did it 1 year without basically leaving, all in the air about, if you want to read it, if you want to do it, so that's what you have to do. And the engagement was very low. So because we saw in class, basically not much was happening. So that's when we started to consider actually other methodology. And one of those was to use Connect as a platform from McGraw Hill. where basically it has an advantage, especially for well, for many things. First of all, in the flipped class paradigm, for instance, students have to learn some theory beforehand. So I prepared together with others some videos explaining the concept, because our students feel also more confident with visual like type of learning. But at the same time, on Connect, there's the access to the smart book. So the smart book, once that we can select the topic that they want to learn, students, each of them has to actually complete them. So they have to read, they have to complete questions on those. Now you may argue, well, they can use ChatGPT to actually, to answer those questions. Well, it's theory, right? So they have to read something. So at the end of the day, they must, by reading one way or the other, they actually must read some of the concept. Then there is the lecturing class where they can actually strengthen that criteria. Then we had also some practice quizzes. And here I can already foresee the question, say, but practice quizzes are different, so they can still cheat with that one. So that's why we have in class tests in invigilated conditions during the term that is worth a certain percentage, so the students must demonstrate that they're able to do it in invigilated condition. The sum of these two components overall is 40%, which is the pass mark in the UK, okay? While for those that want to get more, so students that get 40, they can also say, I don't want to have anything to do with the exam. It never happened, okay? So generally those that get 40 there, they are the ones that are actually keen to improve. And those that didn't do great, but are close enough to the pass mark, so they have less stress. And then you have another exam in invigilated conditions. Okay, so basically the way we set up the module is to have the students do some work at the beginning so that they feel challenged. So they must feel challenged at the beginning, because in this way they appreciate that the topic is a bit difficult. And also we are there. So what I told to my students, they can book a meeting with me at any point, any hour, well, any working hour, I must say, with 1 hour notice. So they just book, or they can show up at my door. I'm there. I had very positive feedback. If you read the literature on the subject of flipped class, many students don't like it. So actually there's a very nice study in which they say, no, we don't like it. Actually, it seems that we learn more or less, but actually they perform better at the exam. So there is actually evidence there. And we notice the same thing. But again, if communication is key, if we actually interact with the student, we show them why it's important, what they actually end up doing by the end, and say in the module feedback questionnaire that we had is, oh, we actually like that. So we like the flipped class, and especially they like the fact that every week they had to do something. And the other good thing about the way the Connect infrastructure works is that you can get immediately hold of those that either are not engaging, or there are some concepts that are more difficult for most of them. Okay, so you can actually cover those in class, and attendance also improves because students see a point in actually showing up at the lecture to actually reinforce those concepts. And since all the problems that we do during the problem class of 2 hours are all exam-like problems that are related to the Connect exercise, students actually feel that they have to come. Now, is not attendance at 100%. I would be lying if I tell you that, but it's definitely better than what I've seen, for instance, in the past 2 years. So this year has actually been way better in terms of promoting engagement. It must be summative, so it must bear a marks. Otherwise, students are not going to do it. At least in the UK, since Connect is offered as part of the tuition, so they do not pay extra to access that service, then it must be summative. We tried with, I leave it non-compulsory, and the engagement after 3 weeks just dumped to 0 because there are other priority across the board. But what we saw this year for the first time, we actually had above 70% of students passing the module at first seat, which has been the first time in 6 years. So has been something that a very good achievement in basically embedding in the right point these technologies with student outcomes.
Thank you, Francesco. That's so interesting. And there was lots in there, sort of themes that I think are going to come up over and over again about the sort of making things sort of a little bit incentivized, perhaps sort of incentivizing that engagement. But really interesting sort of how research-based as well you are and how you tend to sort of iterate what you're doing as you go along. It's really, really very interesting. Thank you so much. And if I could go next to Celine. So I know that you use Connect on your second year business administration module, where you have a huge cohort of international and Dutch students from a mixture of specialisms with greater or lesser analytical skills. How would you describe the way you've integrated technology into your module and the results that you've seen?
Yeah, so indeed, I teach very large cohorts of 800 and 1,000 students, and they're doing business administration. So some might want to do marketing or HR and are not interested in finance at all. So we have experienced very low passing rates, like 25% would not shock me beforehand. It's much better now, but it was kind of normal. And a huge thing there was students would not show up to class because when they would, they couldn't follow what we were talking about. So they would just kind of ignore it, and then a week before the exam start to study, which would be too late, and they clearly wouldn't pass the course. So I've introduced learning journey, and I agree with Francesca and Donald. You both said that how important it is to communicate how they should study and say that at the beginning when they are still in the class, and like kind of take them by the hand what the steps are that they should take. So I recommend them start by reading the book chapter. Then they do the concept check, which is the smart book. And I've attached a bonus thing to that, as what I said before. Then they come to the lecture. Afterwards, they go back and do some math exercises. They come to the workshop and then some additional math exercises. And I constantly repeat this learning journey. And what I really like about the bonus part is it's kind of in between summative and formative. So it's formative in the sense that it's about rewarding effort rather than having it correct. So whenever they have a question incorrect, they are directed back to the book chapter, have to read it again, and then the question comes back until they have it correct. So it will just take them longer to complete the bonus assignment, but eventually they can all complete it if they just read it again and then try to answer it again. And what I've noticed with introducing that bonus test, I first ran into a lot of resistance, both from my institution as from students. So the institution, initially the exam board was also not fine with it. So I really had to, cohere to some rules. So they only get the bonus point if they pass for the written test at the end. So for us, the passing mark is 5.5. So only when they have that for the written test, they get the additional point. And Francesco, you said we cannot have above 100 points. Also for us, if a student scores a 9.5 on the written test, they cannot get a 10.5. It will be kept at 10. So, okay, that was from the institution side. And the students, they all felt that they had to do more than their peers in the years before. They thought it was an additional thing, that it took them a long time, extra work. So initially, they were not happy with it. I also got a lot of complaints that they would have to buy the bonus point, which I explained, no, you don't buy the bonus point. You buy to get access to all the official course material, including the bonus point. So I have to say the first week I thought, okay, what have I done? Why did I do this? I explained to students, I don't get paid anything extra. I only introduce this to help you, because I really believe when the foundation is in place, when you engage with the material on a weekly basis, you're going to do better. And the results in the end were like so amazing. Students that did participate in the bonus test, they scored on average more than 2 points higher. So 1 point is of course for the bonus point that they would get, but the other point is just from those students that did it were so much better prepared for the exam. So the effect was double. And in the end, students at the evaluation were super happy with the system.
I love that. There's been quite a bit of a talk in the chat about carrots versus sticks. And I love that actually you kind of got it's a carrot and a stick there, right? That they get the extra.
Exactly. Yeah, it's actually a carrot, not a stick.
Yeah, I love it. It's brilliant. Thank you. And coming on to you now, Donald. Thank you. And sorry, we've spoken many times about how use Connect to provide the structure. And I know I've just asked you to kind of slightly cannibalize what you might have been about to say, because I've already asked you about that. But you've also I know you're really passionate about using data to enhance teaching and learning. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks. So I'm not too dissimilar from Celine there. We don't have, I don't use bonus points, but I do assign them a reading on SmartBook every week. And that then acts as a weighting on their online test results. So if they don't do any of the readings, then they get nothing, no matter whether they got 100% on their online tests or not. And, you know, it's set up like that in terms of there's a big incentive for them to just do those weekly readings, which are in line with what they're doing in lectures, and that's well communicated to them. It sets them up for the tutorials the following week and then helps them do better in their online tests. So that's how I kind of structure trying to make them do the reading. Before I ever had that system, nobody ever did a reading. If you looked at the stats, you know, you could assign it, but if they didn't see any points or whatever, they just didn't do it. But in terms of the data side of things, yeah, I mean, obviously in the first week or two, I do a lot. Well, I'm teaching introductory economics, so you talk about correlation versus causation. You try and give different examples, and it's a perfect example then to just take out some of the data and say, well, if I add in this, this, and this as a control, this is what it looks like. It's still not perfect because I don't get lecture attendance. We don't have a system like I see some people have in the chat. All I have is tutorial attendance, and obviously I can't get any library hours or kind of offline study as well, and other kind of controls. But you can show them then how you can actually you know, show the strong correlation between engagement with what I can see that they're engaging with and their performance. We've done kind of unconditional quantile kind of regressions where we look, and the students at the lower end and the upper end don't really benefit, because at the lower end, they're either just not going to engage and not going to do well. In a huge class, that's going to happen, no matter what you can do. And the same for very high ability students. They're probably going to do very well anyway. But we see a big benefit for the kind of, let's say, the 60–70% of students in the middle there. And another thing I've done recently with colleagues as part of a wider project for first years is we pulled together all of our learning analytics across our modules from, you know, they mightn't use Connect or McGraw Hill's Connect system, but we still have all their VLE activity and stats. And they hired a data analyst, and we started running forecast models based on previous years in terms of attendance and all the things we can track at a certain stage of the semester based on what we can see in terms of current engagement. This is, you're in a red light, orange light, or green light zone. With about 80%, 85% of a kind of a, you know, successful prediction. But again, just using that as a kind of an inflection point in the middle of the semester where I'll tell students, look, this is going to come out. It's going to say you're in this zone, red, orange, or green, in terms of what I can see about your engagement and how likely you are to perform well enough in the module. It doesn't mean you're going to get an A or an F or whatever, but more as a way of kind of, you know, getting students to kind of take stock of where we can see what they're doing, and then also provide support for students who say, look, I'm struggling or whatever like that. So that's been something we've been trying to build on in the last 2 years by making more use of the learning analytics. They're not perfect, nothing is, but it's more to show students across a number of modules in first year that their support's available to kind of, it's so easy to get lost in the crowd in groups that size, and to kind of show them that there are people there who care, and that all they have to do is kind of arrange to meet with us or different first year support liaison officers. So that's how we've been using a lot of the learning analytics data, and just trying to improve then over time what we're able to track and what we're not able to track.
I mean, that must be such a powerful message to be able to say, you know, based on your sort of demographic, I suppose, in terms of attendance and engagement, we can predict with sort of almost 85% accuracy where you're gonna wind up if you're not careful. I think, I mean, if that doesn't resonate, then I don't really know what would. But yeah. I just want to throw to Gary as well, because I know Gary and his team meet with sort of hundreds of instructors and heads of departments every year. And Gary, are there any themes, other themes that you've seen emerging with some of the other partners that we work with?
Yeah, like definitely a lot of the stuff has come up there, but Donald spoke about structure and that transition from second level to third level education. It's always a bit of a bugbear for me that there's that expectation that they're just going to be self-motivated adults and kind of get stuck into university life and take ownership of their learning when they've never really had to do that before. So I think what everyone in the panel has mentioned there about having that structure that students can actually see. And what I mean by that is, I think it was Donald mentioned the course outline that first day where they look at, right, what's the expectation here? What's the breakdown of grade? What does this all look like? For me personally, I think that's what students see. So when they look at that and they see it's 100% assessment, the mindset is almost, I don't really have to do anything between now and December to potentially pass the course. Whereas if they see a series of deadlines and they see a series of incentivized activity throughout the term, they jot those things down in their diary and they take note of them and they set alarms and they set reminders, and all of a sudden there's an expectation, there's a structure, and there's a shift in mindset for those students. And I think we'll come to one or two examples in a few minutes, Raz, but I think the rethink that is potentially needed is not necessarily how do we track attendance, how do we force them back into the classroom, but more so how do we design modules into the future that utilize technology where technology can add value versus where can the instructor is the instructor most important and most valuable, and how do we shine a light on that, and how do we then kind of I think a few people mentioned in the chat there, how do we creatively design the module to drive the right behaviors to create an environment where students see real value and relevance in coming into the classroom? Because we shall not mention the name of this particular thing, but it's cracked open the idea of content and the idea of information. All of that is accessible to everyone in the world right now, and that can't be argued. But reputable content, the type of content that we want them engaging with, we need to focus them into those spaces, and we need to get them engaged with the experts like we have on the panel in person, so that they're getting the maximum benefit from their learning journey through university. Because alternatively, students are going to start to see university as information, and they'll correlate information with systems that are freely available elsewhere, and that's a strange space then for HE to kind of venture into. So it's the value and relevance we need to focus in on, and I think technology has a major role to play in that, but used correctly in the way that the guys have already mentioned.
Thank you very much, Gary. Oh, what have I done there? Sorry. Right. Thank you very much, Gary. And thank you to everybody for sharing all of your perspectives. It's great to hear about some of the practical ways that you've been able to use technology, and positioning is what I'm hearing, that it's really about the positioning as the way to improve the engagement and attendance situation. It's really come across with the positioning piece is all important, that it's not just about using the sort of digital technology to offer you insight and visibility. It's about what you do with that power that really matters. But I'd like to pass now to some audience questions. We've had some really great ones coming through in the chat. I think that some of them have been answered as we've gone along. But there's a great one here about well, I don't know if it's a question or a statement, and I think we could turn it into a question or a discussion anyway. It's worth discussing the challenge to colleagues' mental health and well-being with no attendance for something they care about deeply. This can also be detrimental to us all in other ways. I don't know, Celine, do you have any take on that?
Yeah, I think I recognize that, and I'm also super vulnerable about that in class. So in the first class, I tell students that I love teaching because I love to see students live and not on a screen. So I give them several reasons why to come to class, and one of them being that it makes me super happy, and that I believe that it also will make them feel happy afterwards.
Yeah.
So I think we can also be honest about that towards students.
Yeah.
Did I get the question correct?
Yes, I think so. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And Francesco, do you? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I had instances in which once I showed up in a class and there was no one, and then 5 people basically arrived out of 100, and I said, "Where is the rest? So is it me? Is something wrong?" So we had students and student rep apologizing to the whole staff members for the low attendance. I said, "You're not doing anything wrong. You're doing everything that you should be doing. We're very happy with everything you're doing. It's just people don't engage." There is, I mean, from the tone of the question, there is also recognition of, also at least in the UK, is the management that basically tell us and mandate things that we have to do to keep stakeholders happy, and stakeholders being the student. We are not as staff stakeholders. So if we need to actually make, you know, who are the stakeholders, the students, the accreditation body, all the other people, external collaborator, those gets priority, often at the expenses of staff. And often, while there is understanding about the situation, but often there is no understanding of the fact that if staff then keeps leaving, so if staff leaves because they don't see themselves fit anymore. So if I, as Celine was saying, you know, we're doing this because we love teaching, but we can't teach chairs or black screens. We want to see people, at least, you know, a few of them, because we made preparation, we made choices. And I think this is the frustration that many people on the top, sometimes they seem not to understand.
And I think that's so crucial. I mean, you know, there's many ways in which sort of digital technologies could be helpful, perhaps to enhance teaching and learning, and to sort of help address some of these challenges. But fundamentally, teaching and learning is a social thing. And I think that if we lose that, then we lose the most valuable aspect, you know, the interaction between so instructors and students, but also between students themselves, that sort of peer-to-peer learning. And in fact, somebody has put, I think, in the chat, I just need to try and find it, something about so yeah, we've talked about attendance and engagement of students, but how about the interaction amongst students themselves, and have we noticed any changes there as well? And does anyone have any tips on how to enhance the community setting? If I could throw that one to Donal first, please.
Yeah, well, in terms, that happens in the smaller group tutorials in my modules, where you can really, I work with a team of TAs in terms of what they have to do in each tutorial. They've often told me, look, they can't get any interaction going, they can't get any students talking. Even in tutorials where they might be going through the answers to something, nobody's taking down any note or even taking down what they're right at. They found it bizarre in the last year or two, how it's just very, very passive. So we've been trying to get different types of group activities and things like that, where you're just kind of forcing them into groups of 2 or 3 to work on a different problem, then going from group to group. You know, it's fairly basic stuff, but even that, they said, can sometimes be hard. And the odd time I dip in and out, because there's maybe 28, 30 tutorials in the module, but I might dip into 1 or 2 a week, where I kind of step in and just see how they're going as well, because it's pretty much impossible for me in a lecture setting to kind of have that level of interaction and get them talking to each other. My TAs have definitely found it hugely problematic, and that's why we've been trying to get more group work type activities to kind of get them talking to each other.
Yeah, and I know that was a big thing that came out in the Guardian article that I read a few weeks back, that sort of slightly prompted this webinar, was that students themselves, actually, those committed ones who are turning up, are finding that, you know, when they're going and they're not even sure they're going to see people they meet on the course again, and it's really having an impact on the sort of the university experience, not just on the sort of the teaching and learning.
There is a move. It's only been discussed very recently, but bouncing off of that, what we find, it's just possibly in my university, I don't know, is it the same in others, but they're in different tutorial groups across every module. And I'm not sure if it's going to be for next year, but the year after, every first year student that comes in is going to be in the same tutorial group across every module. So again, that they want them to get a bit more familiar with each other, and you're not going to be allowed to move around. I don't know, it could be highly problematic if students say, I can't come that day because I'm commuting and I'm coming, you know, but they're recognizing that they want to get them into the same groups, small groups, that is, more often, to try and up that engagement.
That does sound like a good thing to try. It'd be interesting to see how that does pan out. We'll have to talk to you about it later on. Gary, can I just throw that same question over to you?
Yeah, it's I have a kind of a useful example, because I guess getting the students together, it comes back to that idea of kind of looking at the structure of a typical kind of module, early undergraduate module at a university, and thinking about what we actually want to get out of it. And the example that I have is from Neoma Business School in Paris. They made a decision there about 4 years ago to the head of pedagogy and innovation made a decision to almost mandate a piece of technology to be used on every module. And the thinking behind that was, what can actually be automated? What lower level Bloom's content could a machine actually deliver to a group of students, versus where is the actual requirement for the academic, and where do the students need to be? When do they need to be on campus in person? So he mandated the digital component as a starting point, and that kind of short-circuited the whole system. So effectively what he had then was every instructor, and it wasn't just McGraw Hill technology, it was just clever, useful, adaptive and AI technologies that could actually fulfill a purpose on a module. And what they all did for all the undergraduate modules was plug in that 10 or 15 or 20% component that was delivered through an adaptive system or through an AI driven system. And then in the second year, I had a rethink of what actually is the technology doing for me here? What are the students actually gaining from it? And how can I now repurpose my in-class time effectively, so that I'm getting maximum efficiencies out of my 12-week period or whatever it might be for my module. But the interesting thing is what the head of pedagogy and innovation hopes to do next, which is to think about it a step further. What can the technology do? What can only the instructor do? But what do they have to be on campus physically there for, versus what can be delivered virtually? So is there an opportunity to potentially have the AI adaptive systems that are a part of it? Part of the module will be delivered in person, but potentially with a focus on group work or working through problem sets and things like that, because they're going to get maximum benefit from being in the room for that. Is there information that can be imparted directly just through virtual sessions that can be delivered from distance, whether it's synchronously or asynchronously? And I think that was really interesting as a concept, and that's where Neoma Business School is going next. But that creativity, or that space to rethink it, or that space to kind of repurpose time and spaces, only comes from kind of having that luxury of knowing that part of the teaching is actually being delegated to technology. And the only way you can guarantee that it's playing a role and a part in the process is by giving the students that incentive and making it visible on the module.
Francesco, can I just go to you? I think I can see you.
Yeah, something very quickly. It's been raised in the Q&A. So I want to answer right by Professor McCann about the teaching in large cohorts, and the fact that a 90 minutes lecture, I can concentrate, is too tiring, is incredibly hard, and so how can we make it more interactive? I share the same, exactly identical conditions. So one thing that we tend to do is less with timetable, to basically first thing to arrange no more. So it generally is 1 hour lecture, and then the 2 hours of example classes, always to have a break in the middle to basically have people breathe. The second other point is to use a lot of quizzes, like real-time quizzes, and ask them to actually perform some activities. In this respect, especially with their neighbor peers, is also a way to kind of, it's a nice breaking exercise, if you wish. But by having session in which I talk, followed by how they talk, how they interact, and even, I mean, it may seem a bit naive, but the idea of, for instance, asking questions, quizzes, and for those that actually get it correct, they get a bar of chocolate or something like that you can see on the top of the questionnaire. That keeps their attention span for a bit longer. Now, you can't go on and on for hours, of course, but it basically gets you until the finish line, which is that first break, that then leads to the second one. So again, it's not a silver bullet, but it's definitely something that I personally noticed that helped in that context.
Thank you. That's a lovely example, Francesco. Sadly, we are 1 minute before the end, and I know that Celine's got a really hard cut off. So before Celine has to drop off, and I can see that some people in the audience are also having to go. Just want to say a huge thank you to each of you for making the time today to come and join us and share your perspectives with us. I've seen so much wonderful stuff in the Q&A going past, of which I've not been able to sort of completely follow it as we've been going through. But I will take some time after this to go and read through that and any questions that we haven't managed to answer, and we'll try and come back to you. It's been such a pleasure, Celine, Francesco and Donal, to see you again. So great to work with you as always. For our audience, thank you for all of your participation, and we'll be in touch very shortly to send you the video recording link so that you can watch this back if you want to and share it with colleagues. And we'll also let you know how you can get in touch with us if there's anything you would like to know more about how our panelists have worked with McGraw Hill to achieve some of the results we've discussed today. So I think that's it. And I think, it's almost ending on time. So I just want to huge thank you to everybody and have a great day. And I hope the summer gets slightly better for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.